HVAC 360, episode number 14, ASHRAE 189.1 with Dennis Stanke. Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of HVAC 360. I'm your host, as always, Matt Nelson. In this episode, we're going to take a break, and we're going to be talking with Dennis Stanke, who is the current chair of ASHRAE 189.1. Brand new chair, just took the reins from Kent Peterson, one of the past presidents of ASHRAE. 189.1, for those of you who don't know, is ASHRAE's high-performance building standard that just came out. It's brand new. It's very all-encompassing, and I won't lead you on any further, so we'll go right to the interview. So here we go. All right, today we're talking with Dennis Stanke, who is the current chair of the Standard 189.1 Committee. How are you doing, Dennis?
I'm doing well, thank you.
So can you tell me a little bit about your background?
Well, I am a longtime employee of the train company, 38 years. I've been involved with airside systems and airside controls for most of those years. I've written a lot of articles and done a lot of presentations on airside systems. And for many years I was a member and then vice chair and then chair of the ASHRAE SSPC 62.1 committee, the ventilation for indoor air quality committee. Mm-hmm. So my background is really related to ventilation and moving air in buildings.
So how did you become involved with this standard?
Well, I was a comment. I submitted many comments on this standard because it had some elements of ventilation in it, and I think that's what got their attention. Although I'm not sure. And then ASHRAE approached me as Kent Peterson was rolling off as chair. They approached me and asked me if I would consider chairing this committee. I think they wanted somebody who had experience with a high-profile ASHRAE committee, and I had that, so I think that's why they approached me.
So is there anything about the committee that is a little bit different than 62 or that you from your expectations?
Well, it's a lot bigger than the 62 committee. I think we had 17 or 18 voting members, and 189.1 has, when I started out, we had 40 voting members. We have 36 right now, but that number fluctuates, actually changes every 6 months or so.
Now, I guess what was there any sort of additional stress that you had on your mind, coming off of, chairing the committee right behind Kent Peterson, former ASHRAE president?
No, because it's a foregone conclusion that you're not going to do as good a job as he did. So. You can only do your best, and I never expected to be as good a leader as Kent was. He was excellent, and everybody knew that. But I thought I could keep the puppies on the paper, so to speak, and do the ASHRAE standard processing as required, so I didn't feel any stress about that.
So now, could you explain in your own terms what ASHRAE 189.1 is?
Well, it's a mandatory language, high-performance green building standard, and it's intended for those code jurisdictions where they want to have some or all of the buildings within their jurisdiction be sustainable buildings with higher than minimum levels of a variety of items, not the least of which is energy. I guess that's a good enough overall description of it.
Now, is it this is a codified, what you'd call a codified standard? What would you how would you describe? Is that's something that is written in a language that can actually be put into code? Is that correct?
Well, yeah, I always refer to it as a mandatory language standard, which means it's written such that all of the requirements within it can be enforced. In other words, there's to the best of our ability, there's no interpretation required. The language is clear and it's mandatory. Versus a guideline, for instance, where the language might be advisory or it might give recommendations. The language in this standard gives requirements. So it's not codified until some code authority adopts it, but it's ready for relatively easy adoption or adaptation because it's in mandatory language.
Now, where has it been adopted so far? Do you have any feeling on that?
Well, to my knowledge, and ASHRAE staff really has better, probably is in a better position to answer this, but to my knowledge, the standard itself has been adopted, at least in part, by the Department of Defense for at least for Army installations. And what they did was they essentially said, as much as we can, we're going to use those sections of the standard that are appropriate for any given building. And so it's not like all buildings are going to comply with all sections. It's just that they're going to use this standard to guide them as much as possible. In terms of other code jurisdictions, there's several code jurisdictions that have adopted an early version of the International Green Construction Code, the IGCC, which is a code that was that's under development by the International Code Council. And the reason that's important for 189 is that 189.1 is a jurisdictional option for compliance with the IGCC. And there are a couple of jurisdictions that have adopted the IGCC, and if I remember right, it's Maryland, Rhode Island, I think, was one of the first. A few others. I want to say Richmond, or well, I'm not quite sure. It's not Rich. I think it's Richland in Washington State, and a few other localities. Maybe New York City is talking about it. But this is something that, adoption is something that ASHRAE staff is more involved with. Our committee does committee work, and we hear about adoption, but we don't get involved with it.
Okay. Now, how does 189.1 differ than 90.1?
Well, 90.1 is focused on energy use and efficient energy use, whereas 189.1 covers a lot more ground than that. It includes efficient energy use. The way it does that is it says that to comply with 189.1, you have to comply with all the requirements in 90.1 plus some additional requirements. So it's like an overlay standard over 90.1. It picks up 90.1 requirements, adds to them, and then of course covers a lot of other areas other than energy itself.
So, what is, I guess, what's contained within the 189? What are the major components that people could expect to see in the standard?
Well, those other areas beyond energy are sustainable site related. In other words, where you build and what kind of land you build on, and how far is it from services that the occupants of the building are going to need, and how easy is it to get to. Those are all site sustainability requirements. It has water use requirements, or water use efficiency requirements, I should say. In other words, if fixtures in a high-performance green building can't use a lot of water, and you have to control rainwater outdoors. You can't build a bunch of parking lots and let all the rainwater run off into the storm sewers, like we do in traditional buildings. So there's both indoor and outdoor water use requirements. There's, as I said, energy requirements which exceed 90.1. There's indoor environmental requirements which include ventilation. One of the things that's notable in the section for indoor environmental quality is that all the requirements of 62.1 must be met, plus requirements related to acoustics and human comfort, and a few other things that ASHRAE 62 doesn't cover, like requirements related to radon and other soil gases. So that gives you an idea there. Then there's an important section on, I call it the impact section. It covers impact on the building's impact on atmosphere, materials, and resources, and that's about don't use CFCs and use materials that are found near the construction site within a 500-mile radius. Use materials that have high recycled content and that are recyclable. Requirements that are related to going easy on the resources and not filling up the landfill sites.
Mm-hmm. Now, would it be a fair statement that looking at, say, the LEED scorecard and the LEED from the USGBC, U.S. Green Building Council, looking at that rating system, is that outline kind of similar to what the 189.1 looks like in structure a little bit?
Well, in terms of areas covered in a broad sense, they're very similar. Which isn't unexpected, since both the rating system, the LEED rating system, and the standard have as a goal to build a high performance green building that has sustainability in mind. But there is an important distinction, and that is 189.1 is a standard. It doesn't have optional paths or levels of compliance. You either comply with it or you don't. It has requirements in it. The LEED products are rating systems, wherein you pick and choose among requirements, and the more requirements you meet, the higher rating you get for your building. that's a kind of a different way to look at your building than a standard looks at your building, and the two are comparable in terms of content, but it's I guess I'd like to say it's unknown how comparable they are in terms of outcome. We're actually studying that right now. We think that LEED buildings go beyond the minimum requirements of the standard in many cases. That is, in many aspects and in many geographic locations. But it's not something you can generalize.
Okay. So in developing this standard 189.1, what sort of groups were involved in generating this?
Well, this was a collaboration among ASHRAE, the USGBC, and the International, the Illuminating Engineer Society. And the committee right now has some organizational members as well. Both BOMA and AIA are organizational members on the committee, and they have a vote on the committee as well.
So obviously, since it's a standard and it's looking to get adopted, how are code officials being integrated to education? Is there any sort of outreach going on, or obviously this is a little bit more intensive than what ASHRAE 90.1 would expect, and it's something a little bit new and different. What's kind of the expectation from the code enforcement standpoint? Do you have any opinions on that?
Well, yeah, I have an opinion, and that is that work needs to be done there. The standard is a complicated thing, and the requirements are there are many. When you look at it like this, standard 189 has a bunch of requirements in related to energy, but the number one requirement is to comply with all the requirements in 90.1. Well, that's a lot of requirements, and for code officials to know those requirements and be able to check a design, let's say, and make sure that it is in compliance with all those requirements just related to energy is a big job. So I think education of code officials is an important aspect and needs to be done, and I think needs to be developed. In my view, there's not there. Well, let's put it this way: our committee is not involved with training beyond ASHRAE training sessions, 2-hour or 4-hour training sessions at the annual meeting, which really can only be overviews of the requirements in the standard. If more than that is to be done, especially for code officials, I believe that somebody else is going to be doing that, or perhaps ASHRAE, but perhaps a committee that's separate from 189.1.
Okay. Now, is there something that as far as a lot of people are very interested in the high performance buildings and making sure that society is moving towards that direction. Is there a lot that the engineering community could do in that regards?
Well, if things are really going to happen, if buildings are really going to become high performance, green, and sustainable, it's going to be because that's how they were designed. And with that noted, you can't. If you're the mechanical system designer, there's not much you can do about whether there's a lot of turf grass on the site or whether the the pavers are porous or whether there's too much light going up from the parking lot. Those are all somebody else's in somebody else's purview. So it has to be a collaboration between not only design engineers but the architect and several other contractors who get involved with putting buildings together. It has to be a collaborative team effort if it's really going to get done.
Now, I guess, what are, I guess one of the questions that I have is really, how is the standard going to change? I mean, is this standard on continuous renewal like some of the other ASHRAE standards?
It's a continuous maintenance standard.
Okay.
In fact, when it became a continuous maintenance standard, in ASHRAE parlance, that's it's a standing standards project committee, so it's an SSPC. And before I got involved, it was a standards project committee, an SPC, and so it was under development. Once it got published, then it went under continuous maintenance, and that's when I came in as chair, and now it's a continuous maintenance standard. It'll continue. It's continually updated through a relatively well. It seems simple to me, but it seems complicated to some. But a well established process for proposing addenda to the standard, that is, proposing changes to the standard and processing those changes, including letting the public see and comment on those proposed changes, and essentially following ANSI rules for ANSI standards.
Are there any areas that you see that are going to be possibly changed? I mean, I guess right now the current version would be considered what? When was it issued? 2009, or was
correct.
it?
Yes,
so,
that's correct.
So the next one's going to be 2012. Is that?
Actually, no. The next version will be issued later this year, 2011. And the motivation for that is to publish it in time so that it's available before the final action committee hearing for the IGCC. So the most up-to-date requirements in 189.1 can be included in the first issue, that is the 2012 issue of the IGCC. And then after this time, then it'll get on the same cycle as 90.1 and 62.1. In other words, there'll be a 2013 version and 2016 and so on. It'll be on the 3-year code cycle, we call it.
Okay, so they're all going to line up, or because I know the next version, the current version of 90.1 is 2010, and so the next one's going to be 2013. So it's going to start lining up again, like you said.
Correct.
Now, what are some of the changes that we're going to? Are there going to be any significant changes, or this is more, just trying to, incorporating some minor things and for the 2011 version?
Well, in my view, it keeping up with 90.1 and 62.1 and standard 55. Which is the comfort standard, keeping up with those three standards, which are the primary standards referenced in 189.1. Keeping up is a big deal, and that's been, since I got on the committee, the bulk of the addenda that we've processed have been related to catching up to the 2010 version of 90.1 and 62.1, and we continue to monitor what they're doing and issue addenda that will help us be in sync essentially with future versions of 90.1 and 62.1.
Now, how is that? How is that incorporated? Obviously, you get a new version of 90.1. Is the standard just saying you have to be so much better than the the base standard? Is that the case, or is there more to it than that?
Well, there's really much more to it than that. It's actually requirement by requirement approach. In other words, if a given paragraph in 90.1 requires economizers under certain conditions, we check the corresponding paragraph, which won't be the same number, of course, but there'll be a corresponding paragraph in 189.1, and we'll check to make sure that our requirement for economizer operation is equal to or better than, in terms of reduced energy use, than the 90.1 requirement. So we have to keep track of every change they're making, every requirement modification that they make to see if that change will result in a change to 189.1.
Now we have, I think the next version of LEAD is going to be 2012. Is that going to have any effect on what's going on in your committee, or how is that? Can you speak to that at all?
Well, we of course will be paying attention to what they're doing, and some of the requirements that they include in 2012, we will pick up in terms of we will as a committee think, well, this is a pretty good requirement, we should include it in our standard, and so we'll write an addendum and process it. We'll get it out to public review, and we'll try to get it incorporated into our standard. So we'll follow along with what we view as good ideas in the LEAD rating systems, as best we can.
Okay. Now, as far as the education of 189, you had mentioned they have at the ASHRAE summer and winter meetings, they have special sessions to kind of, I guess, give a brief overview of 189.1. What other things are available for information, for learning, for getting a better handle on what this is going to entail? Well,
at this point, those short courses that are available, both with an instructor semi-annually at the winter and summer meetings, and they're also available online at. I believe the way they do that is with webinars. So there's a specific time in October, for instance, when there's going to be an online short course, and what people have to do is watch the ASHRAE website under the Education tab and find out when there's going to be some educational short courses available and how they're going to be available. But the other thing that people can do, of course, is get themselves a copy of the user's guide and use it to help educate themselves on what the requirements of the standard are, what they mean, how you options to comply. Let's put it that way, and what maybe examples and example calculations and the rationale behind some of the requirements and so on.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, thinking about it in my own head, really, since a lot of the requirements are coming from 90.1 and 62 and 55, those type of standards, you really might just regress back to learning about those and then seeing how they're being tweaked in 189.1.
Yes, that's actually probably one of the more important things that you can do if you want to keep up is go to some of the 90.1 ongoing short courses that explain, for instance, the 2010 version of 90.1, or go to some of the 62.1 short courses that explain the 2010 version of 62.1. Those are, you learn a lot that you'll have to know in order to comply with 189.1.
Mm-hmm. So is that the user's guide for 189.1? Is that the committee that develops that?
The committee is involved in that. The committee writes a statement of work, and then that statement of work goes out for bid to contractors, and in the end, a contractor is chosen, and a contractor writes the user's manual. But then the committee approves, of course. So there's the committee is involved, but there's a contract that's being actually paid to do the work for the user's manual.
Now, I guess one of the questions that pops into my mind when I'm constantly, I look at the 189.1, I look at lead. Obviously, and you had kind of said that, 189 is a standard. 189.1 is a standard. It's a benchmark. I guess what does it mean as far as kind of, I guess, the lead rating system? I mean, is it meant to kind of be, okay, if you comply with 189.1, is that like ASHRAE or U.S. lead certified kind of level, or is that has there been kind of an association analyzed from the standard?
Well, no. Making that kind of comparison is really hard because it's very much project specific or say project dependent and site dependent, and to make a broad generalization, you may find that one building in one site, if it meets all the requirements of 189.1, it might wind up being a LEED certified building, but it might not. It just might come really close to that, or it might be a LEED silver. You can't predict because the requirements to the two. Well, okay. Let me just explain it this way. You must meet all the requirements in 189.1. You may meet you must meet all the prerequisites in the LEED rating system, but then after that, it's your choice on a lot of the credits, what you're going to meet and what you're not going to meet. You may find that some aspects related to site just didn't work out very well on this site, and this architect didn't want to use porous pavers, so they decided not to use porous pavers, and therefore not earn a point on a given credit. But if you look in 189.1, well, if they're going to comply, that was a requirement. They had to do that. So there's a lot of choices in LEED, and there are some optional compliance paths in 189.1, but you have to do one or the other. It's not you don't get to dismiss any requirements and say, well, it's too hard in this case. I'm not going to do that one, which is what you can do with LEED. You can kind of decide. You can pick and choose what to comply with on a given job, but you can't do that and comply with 189.1.
Okay, fair enough. So if somebody is interested in getting involved in 189.1, how would they do that? I mean, is that a possibility?
Yeah, sure. It's an ASHRAE committee, and ASHRAE on their website gives instructions on how to apply for membership to ASHRAE committees. And so anybody at any time can go to the ASHRAE website and fill out the paperwork and apply for membership, and then the committee will look at the applicants and decide who has strengths that match up with a need that we have on the committee, and who has experience that matches up with a need that we have, and we'll go through those applications and decide who to let's say offer a spot in the committee to. Normally people come on as non-voting members, and then if they show an interest and are active participants, then eventually they're let's say promoted to voting member status, and typically the voting member period of involvement is it's a chair's choice, but it's usually 4 years.
Okay. And if they can, and you meet at the summer and winter meetings, and so those are anybody who just wants to pop by and attend those are available as well.
That's true, and not only that, we meet monthly via webinar, and I believe that those meetings are also available on a first come first serve basis to people who are not members of the committee. The reason I say first come first serve is our telephone lines have a limit to how many people can actually participate on a conference call, and so the committee members are all there, and then as much it's like we have a certain room size.
Sure.
The committee gets in, and some people are standing out in the hall. For the most part, though, we haven't found that to be a problem. And I haven't heard any complaints from people who have wanted to attend a webinar session and have not been able to.
Excellent. All right. Well, I appreciate the information on 189.1, Dennis. And I think the one thing that I always like to do is ask on an unrelated topic, kind of, if you had any lessons learned that you'd like to share, whether they be in manufacturing or construction, anything that you've learned along the way that might help people out in the field or on the boards.
Well, people my age, I'm getting up there now, so I have a lot of experience, right? And so people with experience like I have already know some of these things, like don't overcommit. That's a soft skill, right? That we don't all have. In fact, most of us don't have it. Most of us overcommit, but that's good advice, I think, and I wish I could take it myself. One of the things I found on a different subject is in this modern world where we do so much by email, it's clear to me that people people write emails fast and they don't proofread, and that's a discipline that we all need to get better at, because it's so easy to leave out a negative where you meant to put one in, and reverse the meaning of what you just sent. To me, proofreading your email is really a good thing to remember, and that as you go through the process of life, and you know, a couple of things that everybody knows show up so that you can get something done, and keep up so that you don't get behind. Once you get behind in this world, it's really hard to catch up.
Excellent.
That's about it.
Good. Well, I appreciate that. Those are words of wisdom and lessons learned from you, Dennis. Again, I appreciate your time to sit down and talk with us regarding 189.1, and I guess good luck to you, and hopefully we'll hear from you in the future.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, we're back. Thanks again to Dennis and his willingness to spend some time with us to talk a little bit about 189.1. It's really, I think, a brand new standard that is going to get a lot of traction now that it's incorporated into the International Green Construction Code. Is as Dennis had pointed out, also the broad reach. This is not just a standard for ASHRAE engineers. It's a standard for electrical engineers, standard for architects, standard for plumbing engineers. So I think the real takeaway item from this interview that we've kind of stumbled upon is really for HVAC engineers. Learning about 189, that's one thing, but really I think that you need to once you learn the basic structure of it, I think the next most important thing is to keep current on your fundamental standards, like the 90.1s, the 62.1, the ventilation code, and the 55, which is the comfort code, or the comfort standard, rather. So, again, I think that's pretty much all I have for this week. Please, if you have any comments or suggestions, go ahead and email those to me at matt@buildingx.co. Or if you want to visit my blog, there's little extra bits and pieces that I will post up there, and that's at buildingx.co as well. Follow me on Twitter at my handle is buildingx. And as always, iTunes feedback is always greatly appreciated. So thanks for listening. I really appreciate each and every one of you. And until next time, remember, know what you build and share what you know.